Welcome to Those Who Do, the podcast, a conversation with people about their unique interests, hobbies, careers, and lives. I'm Zach Barclay, here with the Perry White to my J. Jonah Jameson, Tony Forsmark. Ernesto De La O is a husband and father, born and raised in California. He's just like you and me. He takes his kids to football games, has slip and slide parties in the backyard, and hosts sleepovers for his children's friends. It also just so happens he's an editor for reality television shows. Which ones, you ask? The answer is yes. Ernesto's resume of reality television is ridiculously long. Among his credits are The Challenge, Shark Week, Total Bellas, Total Divas, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Tori Dean, In Love, and The Amazing Race, just to name a few. Ernesto has gone from being a nameless, faceless data logger to now supervising teams of editors on assignments that are sometimes in multiple countries at the same time. He talks with us about his early career in terrestrial radio and explains how editing has changed throughout the years, from being an on-site, locked-in-a-room pursuit to something people are doing on a table in their kitchen all over the world. Besides being an accomplished and respected editor in the entertainment industry, Ernesto is a warm, welcoming, and open guy. He spends a ton of time with his family and was incredibly gracious and generous with his time with us. This is Those Who Do, Creating Reality with Ernesto De La O.
I can't live without TV. Yeah, I almost have that internal monologue where you're like, Arr.
There you go. It's almost like we've been doing this repeatedly, and you should have learned how to do it.
So my engineer here is having...
that joke never gets old.
No, it doesn't.
No, it never gets old.
Well.
Never. Not co-host, not friend of 25 years, just the engineer.
I love the dynamic.
Yeah. I'm glad somebody does.
Oh, I'm fine with it too. I love it. It's freaking ankle.
What'd you do? Did you roll it or something?
I have no idea. Just like 4 or 5 days ago, it started hurting.
Oh, so it wasn't from whatever happened over there earlier?
No.
Okay. And you almost stepped on the dog.
No, I went to the doctor and a podiatrist appointment and all that stuff.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get a cane.
That would be cool. Or a fake ankle.
Well, I mean, if you get a cane, you might as well get the monocle and just complete the monopoly.
100%.
On the top hat?
I am 100% going to get like the silver lion head, just like,
Well, I mean, if you're going to do that, you get a fur coat.
No hurricane for me. Yeah, exactly. Fur coat and
all of the rings.
No, my doctor said I would use a cane, so this is what I'm doing now.
I mean, I ordered it on Amazon. You know how you get to that part where it says people who also bought this?
Yeah.
So I just clicked on all of them, and that's what you do. Okay.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Those Who Do. Today we're here with Ernesto De La O. He's a longtime editor for reality television, and we're going to be talking a little bit about him and his work and what he brings to it.
Thank you, first of all, Ernesto, for gracing us with your presence.
I'm so excited. This is so fun.
I'm excited too, so I'm glad we both are. This will be a lot of fun, I think. But it really means a lot that you're willing to come in and talk to us, because this is kind of a passion project of ours. And I really love talking to people. Tony's here.
Well, that's awesome.
I'm people.
Well, I'm finally to get the opportunity to talk to somebody else, because I'm sure my wife and my kids are all over me talking about editing every day.
Yeah. I've joked over the course of the weekend that this is the most that I've interacted with adults in months. So I'm really enjoying it. Just having some adult time, drinking way too much coffee, and just being around grown-ups. I always like to start basically the same way, because we want to learn about you as a person, because that's the most important part of finding out about what it is that you do. So I always start the same way. Little Ernesto was born where?
Born in Santa Monica, California. I know it's rare that actually, everyone from California and Los Angeles is sort of a transplant, right?
You would think, but our previous guest was also from West. He was from Westwood. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But so far, you're only the second person that's actually from here.
No, yeah. It's interesting having, in hindsight now, because I've been doing this now for like 19 years. Mm-hmm. And so you're hindsight, we're looking back into like how it sort of evolved into me doing this business, right? And I have a very clear memory of what had happened, how it happened. I just didn't realize that was going to be happening. When I was 9 years old, I was watching TV, and my parents came home and said, "Stop watching TV. It's bedtime." And it was 11 o'clock, so it was super late, clearly. And I said, they made me turn the TV off, and I stormed into the living room. I said, I can't live without TV. And I made a stomp, went back to my room, slammed the door. My parents, whatever, they went to bed and stuff. But 20 years later, right? Like they made this thing about me watching too much TV, and this is what I do.
And all you do is watch.
And not only can you not live, but it helps your children live.
I mean, my mom still mentions that, saying the epiphany moment of like how she felt like, oh, don't kill your eyes watching TV. Right. And now it is the provider.
Don't get too close to that screen, Ernesto.
Do you remember? Yeah, it was. It was always like, you're sitting too close to the screen. Now, I was lucky enough to be at your house the other day. You were very close to those screens.
Well, they're not CRTs either. So
that being said, here's my confession. I think I need like better glasses now in context. I think I'm losing. I've crossed over to old man, like bifocal. Like I went to get my eye prescription. She's like, well, I think it's time for progressives. And I was like, what's that? Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, it's where you can see like, from far and close and stuff with a nice line. Is that
bifocals? Kind
of, though. But Reagan uses them for her computer. My wife and I've got it. It's so that you could like, even if you want to be on your phone and watch TV. Here is this and here is that. Yeah.
See, I have special contacts now that help me focus quicker from when I'm looking down to when I'm looking up, because there's a moment when I look down and I look up and it takes me longer to focus. And I'm like, oh, man. And then the eye doctor said, we might want to start talking about bifocals. I mean, I don't know what this we shit is, man, but like.
I will say it was an awkward moment between me and my optometrist. And I was sort of like questioning her. I'm like, listen, I'm going to be questioning you, but I'm only 48 years old. Okay. So are we sure we should be having this conversation? She's like, yes, sir. You need bifocals. I said, well, this is awkward because we're not getting them.
When you say need, define need.
Yes.
I definitely deflected, and I stormed out of the lens crafters pretty much like I did when I was at 9 years old, when I was like, I cannot live without TV.
You're like,
I'm not having these bifocals.
Bifocals.
Right? You got him so worked up he can't even say bifocals.
So there it was. So 9 years old, and then of course life happens, and it, nothing really like transpired other until like I think I was in 21 years old, and my sister was in high school, and she was in marching band, and said, "Oh, can you do a band video for us?" And I was like, "Band video?" She's like, "Yeah, you take you film all the events." And then at the end, someone, put all these images together into music, and it's a fun video thing. And the parent that usually does it can't do it this year because their kid's graduating. I said, well, sure, I'll figure it out. So yeah, and then so I filmed a bunch of things, and sort of, at the end of the year when I have these like clips of video, I'm like, what do I do with this thing now and stuff. So I actually had a friend who actually like did a little software like video editing, and said, oh, I'll help you, guide you along, and we had a blast for like 2 weekends in a row. We were just editing, and I was sort of like, he had no idea what we were doing. We just took Premiere at the time, and he was like, and this is how you do these things. And it was sort of open this thing, and like, oh, this is fun. And then I wanted to spend like hours working on this. It was just some high school little video for my sister. Right. But it was so fun to sort of create this, the montage, right? Like a bunch of images with music. And that sort of like sparked that curiosity of wanting to do it more and more and more and more. And at the time I was working in radio. I was trying to get into UCLA for music, and then also trying to work at a radio station in Los Angeles here.
Which one?
KLOS.
Yeah.
And so then I became like, I was really into the morning thing and doing the radio producing thing. And so I did that for like 4 years, and sort of I was all over the place, right, in terms of trying to like nail down what I wanted to do career-wise. And then I got laid off from KLOS because Disney bought it. Uh-huh. And they were downsizing, and my producer boss said, listen, unless you want to travel and live like all over the country, like there's just really little jobs in radio. And while it was fantastic to have like free concert tickets to everywhere and free swag and meet all these people and stuff, and so it sort of kicked me in the butt to like find a career. And I remembered how much fun I'd had editing, and I said, oh, maybe I'll just go back to school and go into film school.
Did you ever do any on-air stuff on radio?
Well, I sort of started as a screener for the morning show, and then as a producer. So like, because the morning show, Mark and Brian show, was sort of integrated into like sort of the family vibe of the radio and stuff. So you were constantly come into the room or come into the studio, put on some headsets, and sort of talk about these things. And usually it was because things that like you didn't want to talk about in general. But yeah, so
I still have my 97.7 KCRR, the classic rock station, for $7 an hour.
Yeah.
$7 an hour.
I will tell you that my wife, I overslept one morning. So you had to arrive in the morning by like 5:15 in the morning on the dot. And so I overslept one morning because at the time I was trying to make a living. So I had 3 jobs. I worked at a bank, I worked at a Blockbuster, and I had my morning show job. And so I was exhausted all the time. And so at 6:15, right, half asleep, phone rings. And Mariah, my wife, answers the phone. She goes, "It's Mark and Brian, and you're on the air."
That's
and I was like, "What time is it? What?" And she's like, "Good morning, Ernesto. This is Mark and Brian. Your bosses."
That is awesome.
I was like, "I'm sorry." And then I started explaining things, right? Like you would normally a conversation. Right? And then you realize that you're on the air having this conversation. So then you sort of like freeze because you're trying to quantify the fact that you're like having this like conversation that probably like millions of people on the radio do not really care about, but then they do because they're seeing the fear of my voice.
Uncomfortability in your voice. And yes.
Classic. That's awesome.
So yeah, it was hilarious. Not for me, for them, I'm sure. Right. Mariah got a big laugh of it, but yeah.
So what year was that, would you say?
So I started working in radio in 96 and left in 2001. So it's interesting because like so my co-host, obviously they're long retired from KLOS and stuff, but like Mark, one of the hosts, wrote a book. And so it's sort of it was an interesting take. If you're part of Los Angeles radio, they were the, Rick Dees was the iconic radio of Los Angeles for most of the late 80s and early 90s. And then Mark and Brian came in. 70s even, yeah. And so Mark and Brian came in with a sort of like different view on radio and took it over and became like the kings of radio. For a good amount of like the mid 90s or actually early 90s until Howard Stern came in and sort of like wiped the country in terms of radio. Right. So I sort of was in this knee deep viewpoint of a show that was dealing with a lot of chaos and struggle within themselves on their own need to succeed when they were getting hit hard by Howard Stern. And so to the regular listener, they were like kumbaya, like they were like best buds, having been in radio for a long time. They were ultimate professionals in the fact that like on the air, they were like the best buds. And if you listen to them, like, wow, this is like the greatest thing. I want to hang out with them. And I was part of this sort of stressful situation, which was like they were never talking to each other. And it was very awkward. Oof. Many times, like, they come out of break, they go to different rooms. They would talk for about 5 minutes in the morning, and sometimes an occasional break, but that's it. And then they would have a post-radio thing, and that was it. And I didn't even realize just how tumultuous it was until like I'm reading this book now that just came out about just how it wasn't awkward. It was just like, it didn't feel cohesive, right? Like because you were dealing with 2 different personalities and their stress. And we were sort of the underlings of like trying to facilitate a show while dealing with their stress.
Managing that. Yeah.
And then did it just become that way because of the stress of Howard Stern coming on the scene, or had they always kind of had that relationship?
No, actually they had a great relationship coming into Los Angeles and being dominant force. They were actually like, they bounced off comedically wise. They were just a great team. I think it was just that sort of inability to handle being at the top where like, being at the pinnacle of Los Angeles radio and then all of a sudden taken down and then not being able to manage that and sort of like essentially struggling to get back on top, unable to sort of have that conversation and saying like, we're getting our butts beat and we don't know how to do it. And so, what happened obviously was sort of trying to change things and re-evolve and reinvent themselves.
Alienated them from each other.
And they couldn't do it really. Like it was sort of, it just became much more of a, let's not talk about it. Let's just do it. But that sort of like stirs the pot for like this sort of separation, right? Where you're like, you don't know how to have, and maybe they weren't good at communication in general, like, and being able to like talk about feelings and being, I think Mark's book said in the book is like, they just weren't able to agree that they got their butts kicked and just come up with a plan. And so they would throw in things, they would fire the producer. I think they went to 3 producers after that and sort of like, so it was just sort of chaotic to try to build and, so it was an interesting time, and then now from this book, there's, Mark was dealing with some other issues like panic attacks and things like that and stuff. And so there was a deeper layer to all this, of which we were never a part of. So, but it was,
That's interesting to have a look behind the curtain of something you were experiencing. Like that would be it'd be kind of heady to like, you were there and then you're reading in this book about what was happening while you were there, to have this new point of view, perspective of what was happening while you were seeing it.
Yeah. And I think that's the tough part, right? Because I wish and sort of a bigger problem in general, right? Of how we just don't see problems. People put this facade, right, about life, and they portray themselves of what they think they want people to see themselves, and they don't really see the turmoil that's internal, right? Apparently, it was like not sleeping through the night and drinking a bottle of wine to go to bed, and he obviously had to show up at 4:30 in the morning for radio and stuff. Yeah. And so, like, you're trying to you're dealing with the stress of trying to get back on top, but you're dealing with the stress of this issue, and so we just got the stress of it some days where it's like, oh, we're like walking on eggshells essentially, or like, I'm taking calls, trying to get the best calls of the day, and like I'm running into the break, bringing the calls, and he's just grumpy with me because I didn't get a good call, or like, like I get a good call and when he punches him up, like he hangs up, and I'm like, things out of my control, but like I'm taking the brunt of this moment, right? And like
somebody's got to be blamed.
But with all that, I think what's most fascinating about it is that despite what I feel like was chaos, never really was like portrayed on the air. None of it really ever happened on the air. And it was like, I mean, that's the true test of professionalism, is that no matter, and probably like, no matter how crazy it was behind the scenes, when that mic turned on, it was like kumbaya.
And it's go time. We got a job to do.
And their comedy was on point always. They always knew when to hit their timing and stuff. And so I think that was sort of the most fascinating thing for me, is that like you can hide it well.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be the guy that did the KGGO voice. 95 KGGO. Yeah, that's like it was a local station for us.
I just remember getting a note when I first started working at the radio station, because I didn't put enough emphasis on the. Like we're the
enunciation,
the classic rock station. And I'm like, really, man? Like I'm voice tracking for like midnight to 5 a.m. How much focus do I need to put on the at that point? Like it's
branding, man. Yeah. It's branding.
So when I got hired, they didn't tell me. So, I said $7 an hour, but they only paid me for the amount of time I was in studio voice tracking, not for the length of my show. So I was making $7 like a week. Because
that's incredible.
I could go in and voice track the whole week's show in an hour, because I was just hitting breaks. Everything was programmed for me. So I would get a list on the computer of what music was going into the break, where I was coming out of the break, and I'd voice track the breaks, and that was it.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So
it's interesting now how radio is, and how it's evolved into what it is currently, which is like unlocalized radio, right? Like if you are listening to radio in Iowa or Idaho or New York or Los Angeles, it's one voice being recorded from some central hub that gets very well packaged by computer systems and advertisings, that like you're none the wiser that it's like one voice that has like 50,000 markets. But the locality of what used to be like, you listen to your Los Angeles radio and be like, oh, okay, it's my neighborhood DJ or whatever. It's gone. It's now like sort of this corporate, like spoon-fed, like.
Well, it's kind of gone. I mean, I think places like LA and say Chicago or New York, because I mean, there's still the morning hosts for K-Rock. Those are all, local. But I think, when you go to like say Kiss FM, maybe not.
Well,
right?
we've still got some morning zoo happenings in Waterloo, Iowa. We've still got local stations. Yeah. I mean, we've got a couple that are locally owned, so that helps too. But then the station I used to work for was owned by Cumulus forever. And then they sold them to somebody else, and I don't know what's going on there now. I could go in. I still have keys.
Yeah, I remember when I got let go from KLOS, I took an interview with K-Rock, and I took an interview with another alternative station at the time. It was called Y107. It was like the new K-Rock of Los Angeles in like 2001. And I remember touring their studios, and I'd seen what I think it was called Da Vinci or something like that. But it was basically like the new software they'd come in and how it was all checkerboarded in terms of like automate, the sort of the computer, their version of now modern AI in terms of like being able to sort of like take one person, record about 50 breaks, and then lay them in a checkerboard that like they could run programming for the next 4 hours or the week and program it on a Sunday, and then they're done. Like,
walk out and that's it. Yep.
And that's what I was doing. I was programming my show for the whole week. So I had a show. It would start
Sunday night at midnight. So Monday morning at midnight would run till 5, and then every day, Monday through Friday. And I would go in usually on like a Thursday the week before and voice track that whole next week. And it would just play. Like one time when I first started, I went in and voice tracked the night because I was running behind. So I had to voice track that night. So I ran in. It was a buddy of mine's birthday. So I voice tracked the breaks. On one of the breaks, I'm like, hey, and happy birthday to Kyle Jurgensen. I finish. I go to the bar where he's drinking. I'm watching my watch, and I'm like, all right, the break's coming up. Hey, Kyle, come out to my car. So we go out to the car. I turn on the radio. And it's like, and happy birthday to Kyle Jurgensen. He's like, what the?
Well, I think what you're talking about really on display, like on Sirius XM. You know, people are. I mean, that's all pre-programmed, and most of the DJs are at home.
Yeah,
no, they're just recording at home. And
what a wonderful time to be alive, right? It's almost like you could do some type of radio show in your dining room around a circular wooden table with your friends.
A radio show, though.
That's sort of radio.
Oh, okay.
It's way easier if you describe this to old people as it's an internet radio show, because then it's like they accept it somehow. But if you call it a podcast, they're like, what's a podcast?
No, I mean, that was the question. My aunt was like, she saw Zach's had a post where he's like, new endeavor coming up, and he had his suitcase and tagged me, and my aunt's like, okay, so what's going on? And I go, oh, we're just starting a podcast. And then like a couple minutes later, it's, well, you're gonna have to tell me what that is someday, what a podcast is. I'm like, okay, it's a conversation.
Yeah,
it's not a text. So yeah.
Well, it's fascinating. I think we're, not to change the conversation or whatever, but I think, dealing with how AI in the last week or so, or last month, has really sort of like, it's becoming like with ChatGPT and like all the AI apps just really rolling out for everybody to have, that like it's becoming this sort of like the topic of conversation. And so when we talk about how radio, what we consider as the change, right, the sway of radio now, I would imagine that they're going through this sort of change now where like, if you're a corporation that owns radio, how can I now save even more money? Because like, I haven't working in TV, so I'm getting like, I've been able to preview the audio duplication AI, and it is frightening in terms of how good it is. I heard tests and I could not decipher the real voice from the AI voice. And it's like, it's really, and we're at the first year of like development. I can't imagine just how much better, we talked about this, the algorithm, right? Sort of, they can sort of finesse this sort of algorithm. In 5 years, it's going to be even better. Like right now, you need about 30 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour of someone's voice to get a good baseline for like, and then you can type whatever you want and have that read. It may not have the dynamic read like, 95.5, the sort of the emphasis yet. But within that same application, you can have an option to essentially lay in your voice and your inflection. So if I wanted to say like coming up, and then so now the AI takes your voice, lays the original voice over your voice, and tries to find the balance of the inflection. And that is super new and not quite perfect yet.
Yeah.
But in 5 years, that will be perfect. So
we were actually just having this conversation about the strikes and AI and what that means for, like, as an actor or a voice person. That's horrible.
It is. And so if you think about it, like, thinking about Rick Dees or anybody who else happens to be the most lately, like Ryan Seacrest, right? So like if someone were to record 2 hours of Ryan Seacrest and put it into the computer, like he could essentially do another job. And as long as he got approval of what he said on the radio.
And that's the point. Is
he would never, ever have to be in a studio ever again and collect a paycheck.
Well, then, but it also opens the door to, guess what? We can have Casey Kasem back, because we have all the American top 40s from the last, 40 years that he did. And you could, that's, and he would have no say,
Several years ago, I saw a demonstration where they took, they fed in Obama a bunch of his speeches, and then they spit it back out where they just made him say whatever they wanted. And it was, you could kind of feel a little bit the pauses, but that was several years ago.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We're in trouble. It's, I think terrestrial radio, I think you're right, is probably where it's going to show up first, because terrestrial radio is struggling anyway. So if they can make what they're doing cheaper.
And look at Jack FM. They don't even have DJs. They haven't had them for years.
Oh yeah.
It's straight.
But I mean, if every local station can just key in here in Lake Tahoe, and now it feels local again, but it's not even a human. Like I could see that happening. And,
it's true. And that's the thing, right? Like what is important? What do people gravitate to? Does a lot of people would say like, in the early days when I was working in radio, it was like too much talking, more music. Because everyone wanted to just listen to music, right? So, but when you have funny entertainment, like, if you talk about Howard Stern, like that's engaging, like he's so entertaining that you're like, he supersedes music. So I think that's the struggle, right? I think you could have an AI voice, but it may not resonate anyway or connect with somebody. So just because they're sort of like localizing it by saying like, come to Pete's Automart later for the barbecue jamboree or whatever.
But as far as an entertainment factor.
And that's the key, which I think AI is far from like being entertaining yet.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you look at the disasters when it screws up. That's kind of entertaining. Or just like,
when they had to pull the chat bot off of Twitter or because
it was racist.
It almost instantly turned racist
immediately. So it wasn't a chat bot. It was just somebody on Twitter.
But it is truly frightening from all businesses. And speaking from an editor, producer, it is like with these AIs in terms of like being able to sort of like throw in clips to a sort of an application and then having sort of like it quantify like and spitting something out that maybe it's not perfect, but it's like faster. And, we're coming into this TV is sort of changing in that, budgets are becoming shorter and smaller, that they're finding ways to cut corners at everywhere. Even, when I started in 2001 reality TV, the schedules were longer and there was more emphasis on color correction, making them look super pretty, obviously, like, based on TV standards, right? So now, but over the years, because of budgets and cuts and like looking for ways to trim the fat, essentially, it's like, well, what can we get it as good? Is it broadcast legal? Is it, how can we, get it to a point? And so now you start thinking philosophically about editing. Can you throw certain things into an AI and pop out something in a faster schedule, right? For years, we talked about whether or not editing shows would ever be farmed out to other countries, mainly because people can learn the software,
right?
And for a lot cheaper than what the going rate for editors are in Los Angeles or in the United States. And so that never really transpired. I think it's hard to understand
culture.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times, a show has a voice, and like the editing. I'm sure you'll talk about this later. That the editing kind of gives the feel of the show, and that is determinant on the human aspect of it and knowing the show. So if you start farming it out to like 8 different people in different places, each time you farm it to a new person, there's another chance that they just don't get it. They don't get what the flow is supposed to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, unlike, say, animation, which they ship off all the time.
Right.
Yeah, you're not going to necessarily have the same sensibilities television-wise. What they're doing in Japan on TV is not what we're doing in Japan, in television, right? As far as cuts, flow, things like that.
No, it's true. And I think that there's an inherent rhythm and sort of pacing that like every country has. Whether if you don't travel and see other TVs, you really don't get it until you actually travel abroad and see what they're watching. You're like, whoa, this is so completely different. Like if you're even just to the UK or London, like if you watch the TV, it's a lot slower. BBC is like, paced out a whole different rhythmically. And that's been an issue. We've had editors who've like come from like the UK and the rhythm is just completely off because it's a completely different like sensibility, right, to it all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because you want the feel for the people who are watching it because you don't want it to be jarring, and so like different people from different parts of the country have a different flow to their life. I mean, things are a lot slower in other places, faster in other places. So I guess that makes sense. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but that does make a lot of sense.
So reality TV comes in 2001. How did that come about?
Well, it's interesting, right? Like I started at Buena Murray, which is sort of the creator of reality TV. Like they created The Real World. And that sort of new avenue of storytelling, right? Taking people, social experiment essentially. And putting people from different backgrounds, different histories, and putting them together and sort of like seeing how they can cohabitate, right?
In the real world.
In the real world. Yeah. No, I mean, and what a great what a great experiment it has been, right? It's sort of the dawn of what is now, we look at reality TV. You know, I came into it in 96, so it was 4 or 5 years later after I think the first Real World was 90, 91.
Yeah.
And so by the time I jumped in, it was sort of already like diving in. I think there were multiple shows already being created, and the wave of it sort of saw as a new way of telling stories, right? In a different way, in a refreshing way. You could cast people from whole different backgrounds and create incredible, good television. As long as and you know, they were fantastic, pioneering, great storytelling. So yeah, it was like this sort of like, I came into it and not really knowing. I honestly, growing up, I didn't have cable because we couldn't afford it. Right. So it was sort of refreshing. And coming in from radio, I was sort of, wow, this is fantastic. And so I took a job. I just wanted to get in the door while working on my degree. And they said, entry-level job, logging. I'm like, logging? What is that? Like, I had no idea what the term was. And so I said, well, you're going to be watching tapes. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds like...
I can't live without TV. This sounds amazing.
Right? It's fantastic. So, like, I show up, and there's like this TV monitor at a cubicle and a typewriter or computer and a bunch of these, this is going to date me now, but like 1/4-inch tapes, which are little blocks, right? And so you pop in a tape and you're going to watch this thing for half an hour and you're going to type in everything that you say or that happens in it, paraphrasing essentially. And you're going to use some keywords like if there's a specific angle, low angle, full screenshot. So they had these like keywords of things to write. And so it was fascinating. I'm like, okay. So then at first I was starting to type everything was saying. Of course, I never typed fast enough, but like I became a pretty fast typer.
Right.
But then someone like my first day, they're like, no, just capture the essence of what's happening. If there is a line or two that you can type in. And so I did that for a whole day and did the next day. And so this was like a 6-week gig of like this reality show. And it was quite fascinating. You were just watching what essentially was home video footage in real time. And yeah, that's what logging was. In that time, they would go film hours and hours of footage and it had to be logged. And there was no way to quantify all that stuff. Someone could watch it essentially like from the field and write notes, but like the actual like keeping track of how things were managed was this sort of computer program that was created called Pilotware. And you'd essentially like type it all out, and then some story person, some later would come in and be like, type out for searches later. You had a daily editor who would like take all the essence of the day and film, edit it down into like a day so the producers could watch it. And it's interesting to look at it, how that process is then, how it is now. It is so much more streamlined than they really took the time to really, really make sure that everything was watched in a different way.
So how was it? How was the things that you typed in linked to the video? Was it just lining up time code, or was it somehow digitally imprinting it onto the video?
Yeah, it was connected time code wise. So as you typed and watched and you stopped it, it would have a time code imprint on it. So you would type in. What was the most bizarre thing about it after 3 days? Actually, it was the first Friday I went home, and I remember my brain sort of like having 8 hours of this for like 5 days, and I remember walking in my hallway, and my internal monologue was like, low angle to the faucet, zoom in. As I pour a glass of water, I refreshingly say, like, that's delicious. No, but it was like all encompassing, and it was fascinating because I was just watching these people, and it's even more crazy because like you watch somebody for like 5 weeks, and then you like get to like think you know them, right? Because you watch, you basically hung out with them for like 5 weeks. And then like it at some point I saw somebody once in like casting. I was like, hey. And it was that awkward moment, like, you don't know who I am.
You've never seen me before.
But I watched you for 5 weeks. I
have an intimate knowledge of all your movements. Wait, that came out really, really wrong and creepy.
And so how did that transition to, so I know that is a progression from a logger to assistant editor to...
Yeah, it was sort of at the time, it was sort of like I had this necessity to just try everything and learn everything. And the company made it really, really easy for me to sort of like, I remember making friends with the HR person and saying like, I will take any job because I just want to learn. I want to learn all facets and I'm not quite sure what to do. And so whatever happens to be like, even if it's a 1 week, 1 day gig. And so I did audio casting, I did like dubbing, I did coordinating. I was the release coordinator. And so I sort of like, taking all these different jobs to really like learn kind of like, and even though in the back end, I was like, I was still enjoying editing, but you sort of don't have that like that clear direction of because there were so many different jobs and facets, and sort of being in the middle of it was sort of like the niceness, being able to sort of like see what people are doing, immersed completely in this whole thing. And then actually the vibe was so cool. Having worked in the business for a long time, it wasn't very sterile. Nowadays I've worked in many shows, other companies, and different places where it's everyone kind of goes in, closes the door. And actually I was talking to a colleague the other day about how like she worked at a company and everyone sort of like closes their door and see you at 6:30, and it's like a very sterile. And if anyone remembers, like the MTV used to be based in New York and Santa Monica, and they had this building called the Motel, and it was like you walked in, it was something like 2001 Odyssey, because it was like this long hallway of white doors, and it was very sterile, and everyone would show up at 9 a.m, pop out at like 6 o'clock. Yeah, it was very eerie, and I hated working there.
It's kind of like those old 1950s things where all the guys get out of their cars, get out of their driveway and pull in, and then they back out. Yeah.
Something completely out of Pleasantville. It was like, it was that sort of bizarre.
Yeah.
And that sort of like, sort of propelled me to sort of like continue doing it and being excited. And all the editors there were so like, it was such a chill vibe that they were like, pop on in. I'm like, oh, cool. And like, you could see what they were doing. And then sort of that propelled to like my boss, who was like, I'd been doing enough different jobs there. They said like, well, what are you going to do? Like, you gotta pick a career. Like, are you going to go and be a post supervisor, or like, are you going to do like story, or are you going to do like editing? And he's like, but you got to make a decision, because you can't stay in this land forever. And, so he gave me a weekend to think about it. And I came back and I said, I think I want to do editing. He's like, great. I got this project for you to do. It's not going to pay you much, but it's really important. And like, basically,
that was easy.
Yeah, it was literally like that. And he was a great mentor, and he was able to say like, so I came back and he's like, I got a project for you. Take all this footage, make it something entertaining. I don't think it'll ever see the light of day. The network wants to see it. Just, it's a promo type thing. And that's what it was. It dialed back to that high school, trying to make that video for my sister. And I remember working the entire weekend. Like, I was up in the building for like 2, 3 in the morning, like, and far much more hours than I think he expected me to be in this thing. And I created this thing, and it looked like an episode. And he watched it, and he's like, how long did you work on this thing?
A couple hours.
I was like, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And he's like, and he was blown away. And I think that was it. That was it. Like, for me, it was like, it was so much fun where I lost time. You sort of immerse yourself in something that's so
engaging. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so like, being able to craft music and like cut it together, trim it down, find little nuances, reactions, all those things. And I think, the aspect of choices, like what moment is going to resonate more, or like, because you have quantifiably so much footage, and weighting it down to the best. And it was such a good control. If you like puzzles, this is what it is, right? Mm-hmm. Problem solving. Oh, I don't have this moment, or if, and that sort of was the seed to sort of propel me to say like, oh, this is what I want to do, and move me into the path.
In reality TV, as opposed, or maybe very similar to episodic, how much influence does the editor have on story? Do the producers come to you and say, this is the story that we're going to try to push, or do you find a story through the footage?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's a collaboration, ultimately, because, I've said this many times that, like, I think, with sitcoms, it's sort of a writer's medium, right? And films tend to be a director's medium, where it's sort of like the editor gets a creative shot at essentially a rough cut. And then the director comes with his visions of takes and shots and ultimate vision. And obviously, like most films, end up being what the director wants it to be. Very rarely do editors see their vision through as their vision in a movie. But when it comes to reality television, it is a collaboration of storytelling, because there is a story department that makes sure that they know all the essence of the characters and what stories
are possible
and compelling enough, right? Sometimes you may have a moment that is fantastic, but there's no beginning or middle and end for an arc, right? And so you have to sort of stick to those sort of like rules that you just can't have a moment. It might be a good moment, but it doesn't necessarily have middle, begin, end.
It doesn't advance to anything.
Yeah, so I think there's careful crafting in terms of like not a script, but it's sort of an outline, essentially, like, this is a great moment. This is a great story. This is like, this person, we need to really tell this story and And as they sort of massage it into something that's called a string out, right? The editor comes in and takes this and then really dives in even more. But it is a collaboration because you are having to choose the right interview bites to sort of like support that story and make sure that it stays compliant. So I don't think it's either or. I think it's a collaboration of like editors and story departments, sort of like. And obviously that dynamic changes based on whatever company has to be doing, because sometimes you have segment producers, co-executive producers, showrunners. I worked at a company years ago that was like they would shoot all day and the co-executive producer would sit in edit bay and say like, okay, so this is what I shot today, and so this is what I want the story to be. And it was very, very rogue, and there was no organization. It was like, it was very chaotic for me. And I was just like listening. You basically paying me to listen to like you tell me what you want,
right?
As opposed to really massaging it and really putting thought into it. So, I think that aspect of like has been worked on a little bit better over the years.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what I find fascinating about it is that you have an idea of what's, the format you have the idea of, but as the footage comes in, it's changing the story as it goes, as opposed to, we have a storyboard or we have, the script, weeks beforehand. So you could, as an editor, you can like, okay, I know what we're building, but you're kind of just going with the flow. It
is. And sometimes it evolves, right? So sometimes it's like you go thinking it's one direction, but then you really start diving in and something that's a whole different other story. And so, crafting that sort of is, I think that's what, for me, from an editor perspective, like the most enjoyment out of it is I've worked on shows where like you come in saying like, this show is going to be a drama. It's going to be very intense. And we're going to come in scoring this way. And like, then like a week later, you already cut to a first episode and someone comes in and said, well, the network decided actually it's going to be a comedy. And you're sort of like taken back for about a day or two. You're like, what? And then you sort of have to go back in, script all the music, look at all the footage, and retool it essentially. And so that is the challenge of it all, to try and like figure out now it's the comedy and write the angles and all those things and stuff. So that so it's that fluidity, that sort of like constant thing that makes it exciting for me, because it is sort of like a ever evolving. Every day is different based on what you have.
And you and I have talked about how important sound is to the storytelling in reality TV. How much input do you have in, soundtracking?
Well, it's interesting too, because like budgets keep getting cut. And so there is an inherent problem in terms of like how you're able to score and what you're able to score with, right? In the old days, films, you have a film composer who's able to like, you lay your picture down as a picture editor and someone comes in and rescores it and everything's scored. But nowadays, I think like, I always wonder how editors who've never had music background can score. To me, that's the biggest, like, I'm curious, like, have you had music background? Most people will say no. And I'm like, how do you know how to cut music? Because it's so hard. I had music, I studied music, so I know like time signature and 4/4 and 3/4 and rhythm and stuff. So essentially you're given a long 6-minute piece of music and you're able to say like, okay, well now I have to fit this into
finding
like,
the bridge, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And sort of like finding the right, like, you just, find the right piece of it that sort of can, so it's not so jarring, right? Many times it's also like you're basically the composer again. So you're listening to different versions of it, some with stems and some with the bass and some with just the underbelly sync or whatever. So, and being able to sort of like score it in a way that actually works, it's very hard. And so I'm always astounded when an editor hasn't had any sort of music background, but it is another fun part of it, like being able to sort of like rescore. It's like music design, sound design.
Right.
And sort of rhythmically having to sort of like work out the timing of it. And it's another fun part other than just like the basic sound design too, which is so fun to like craft. But not to digress, because I always say like, the biggest problem too is budgets. Right. And so now we're having to deal with libraries a little bit and sort of less quality scoring.
Right. Because you've talked about before, working for MTV is kind of a cheat sheet for you guys because you have access to some things that other places would not.
Yeah, right? In the old days, up until recently, MTV licenses were, and I'm not the music expert, so I'm actually like continuously learning about just how much undervalued. My sister actually works in the music business now,
okay.
So I'm actually, pinging her on like, how does this work? And I've been asking a lot of questions because there is so much like the copywriting and the licensing and, from these shows that live in perpetuity, right? Like, to license a music that's going to be airable for a long time is is a hard thing to do. And so like, yeah, it's always interesting to see how we dive into that.
Right. How much is borrowed and how much is created just for that, or what's out there that's, free range.
Yeah. In the old days, you would get like a minute 30 if you did an MTV show, because I worked on shows like Parental Control and like all these other like this. And so in those days, like you would get a minute and a half of whatever MTV library had access to, which is fantastic. I mean, think about being able to score like Guns N' Roses or like November Rain, one of your shows, right? Like, so I worked for a showrunner who put all his money on like his first episode, and he put all like these high end songs because everyone like the network would be like, this is fantastic. Why do I love this show so much? And it was just, the music was so amazing. So like, but nowadays it's sort of like those licensing, everything is becoming so expensive that like they aren't able to do that for a while. So that was like the heyday. Even until recently, we had that MTV license that allowed us to have like, you could have like last year I worked on a show and we were able to drop in Alanis Morissette and all these main songs that sort of elevated what seemed like the budget of a show.
Right. Absolutely. Under
the blanket of MTV. But, as things change in terms of like licensing.
Right. And I'm sure streaming music is probably part of the equation as to why it's changed.
And it makes sense. If you're a music writer, right, you sort of want to get paid and sort of that. Those licenses have to. I see the plight of everybody who essentially like isn't getting paid, and there's these blanket licenses that were used forever, and not really, making sure that the writers were getting paid or the music collaborators, and so like the trickle down effect of like finances, like so it hurts us because we can't use those sort of licenses to be able to elevate our shows,
right?
But it makes sense.
At the same time, they need to make a living too, right? Yeah,
yeah.
I remember once waking up. It's such a weird deal. Waking up in the middle of the night, like midnight, and all of a sudden I have this song in my head, and I'm like, "What is this song, and what was it the theme song for?" Well, I finally drilled down and realized that it's Paint It Black, right? And then I'm like, "What is this the theme song for?" So I'm Googling around on the internet, trying to figure it out, and then I finally key into my brain. Oh, it's from Tour of Duty on CBS. You remember Tour of Duty, the Vietnam War show? Well, they were only able to use it for so many years. So I'm looking at these clips thinking I'm going insane because all these, the title sequence clips are a completely different song. And I'm like, I'm losing my mind here. I know that this was the theme song for this show, but I assume that's what had to happen because it was a Rolling Stones song. They only had the rights to use it for maybe the first air. And then when it went to syndication, maybe they didn't have the rights anymore because of music rights. I almost had to like check myself in somewhere because I thought I was losing my mind.
It is sad because, if you're a fan of a certain show, right, these sort of, for me, my day doesn't go without me hearing music. It's sort of like my mood, right? Like we went on a walk today and we were listening to like, I was playing the Sundays for my kids and so music is a big part of my daily life and I pushing that on my kids, right? But like that aspect of like attaching a song or to a certain scene or moment or a main title, right? It sort of like lays in a foundation for like your memory for that thing. And sort of like, it gets undercut essentially nowadays because it is. Most shows that we work on now will only have a certain song for the first airable version. And then they do a version called an evergreen version, which is like laying in different cues or different tracks that essentially are like more generic, but will play in perpetuity forever. So you get one shot at it and stuff. But if you're like, I wonder how, I don't know how much that happens nowadays for most shows. Like if you're watching a Mad Men or a Breaking Bad or one of those sort of big name shows, how often those licenses also, because like for me, there's a lot of shows that I watch over the time that like there's a song track attached to that certain moment, right? Yeah. And you're like watching it again, like this feels odd because there's something else. Like
it's like switching the actor that plays the character. Because there's a lot of shows that the music of the show is another character in the show. I remember Supernatural, like after like the third or fourth season, I think Kripke left and was still credited as an executive producer or something, but he wasn't actively show running anymore. And the classic rock music left for like 4 or 5 seasons of the show. And I'm like, I'm not watching the same show. This isn't right. Like that music was a character within the show. And everything got changed because they'd play like generic rock song number 7, instead. And you're just like, no. I need to hear Kansas right here. That's what needs to be here is Kansas, not something from artlist.io, like it has to be something recognizable.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's that way for, movies, especially. I mean, how many times you're like, okay, what movie is this? And you hear it on the radio and like, what movie is this? And everybody's like, yep, then we know what that movie is. So if it's not there, and you're like, well, I don't know if I like this.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, and I wonder about that about movies now. I'm sure these licenses are built in because I think movies are sort of different ball game, right? But like if you think of like Caddyshack or the I'm All Right song, right? There's certain movies, your songs you hear, and like that's that movie,
Right.
Well, and some of those, and probably still today. I mean, like Bond songs, they're made for that movie. So they're recorded, become popular, but they were made for that movie. But other times, like James Gunn makes a playlist in his head and just puts it on
and goes out and buys those songs.
Buys the songs.
Yeah. Can you imagine you're watching Top Gun and all of a sudden it's like I Can't Drive 55 instead of Danger Zone? No, if you drive 55, you'll fall out of the air. What are you talking about? Yeah. It's so important. And I think that speaks to why editing is so important, is that the changes in the evocative feel are tied to the show itself. A show will have an editing feel. The Real World had a very specific, especially that first season, had a very specific feel to all of the cuts. Like it was this weird kind of grungy, almost jump cutty. Like you could feel it happening, and it was jarring, but it worked. And that's, again, the editing was a character in the show. It was something we hadn't seen before because we hadn't ever seen what they were showing us. We had never seen reality TV before. So it was very important to it. And I think a lot of shows are kind of like that. And that's why what you do is so specific and important, because it can change the entire feel of a show if it's edited differently. I mean, I'm speaking to the choir, but like for the people that are listening, like I want them to think about that so that they don't discount. Everybody's like, oh, the actor's important, the director's important, but it's like, no, the editor's really fucking important, guys. Like, that's really important, because if they're not editing the right flow, everything gets discombobulated.
Yeah, and with regards to that, and going back to the music a little bit, is that there is a sense of awareness of time stamping music, and we went through, not now, but like about 5 years ago, this sort of point of trying to score shows with music that didn't seem to timestamp the day of, and that's coming off of like having edited shows like in the early 90s, where you sort of like, if you look at the Real Worlds or the Challenges or those sort of reality shows, they had a lot of music of that particular year, System of a Down. And so you could go back and be like, oh, I know what year this was, because you would be like, this is the soundtrack of that year. And so in the mid, like probably like 2006, 2007, they went through this whole process of like, let's score more cinematic so that there's no timestamp to these shows, and so that they resonate longer, so that viewers don't have a specific, year attachment to a show. That's changed a little bit, and it sort of bounces back and forth, because I think that there's that necessity to make shows
topical.
That, and also just like, there's a lot of shows now for like Paramount Plus that we're doing that like have a sort of a time nostalgia to it, right? And so as we're bringing certain characters back for the shows that resonated in the early 90s or the mid 90s, and they're bringing them back now, and sort of like bringing music of that time, so that sort of like resonates for the viewers. Essentially, the people that can afford Paramount Plus are the people that like of that time period, right? So us, essentially. Yeah. And so like,
well, and I can see value to both ways, like, because nostalgia is so overwhelmingly positive. Like, I wouldn't want to go back and watch season 3 of The Real World with just some like generic non-timestamp music. I want to fit with whatever's happening. I mean, nobody's pulling out an iPhone in season 3. So I know when it is, like, so, like, let's go ahead and leave the music in, granted, there's probably some stuff that's not, that you don't want to date, but gosh, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of, maybe it's just because I'm an old man stuck in my ways, but I like the music to be left. I want it to be the same music.
So you've worked on some of these challenge shows, right?
Yeah.
And then also some, I would say like Big Brother type of situations as well, like where people in a space.
Yes, I mean the basic concept of like most shows.
But the challenge shows are slightly different, because there's that activity that's going on.
For sure,
right? Is there a preference that would you rather do one or the other, or is it's all pretty fun?
No, I think it's all fun. I think, the versatility of it all it works for me because there's different, my job is a problem solver. And so that aspect carries from both like, taking scenes or different moments, like challenge moments that are very adventure. And so for me, it's sort of like, I like the variety. And that's probably why I gravitated towards editing, working shorter terms and stuff, because you're giving something a canvas and it's constantly evolving. And so you're having a problem solve. And so like, I do like challenges in sports or reality competitions because there's so many different elements that you can elevate. And now, honestly, we're going through this fantastic, what I call technology has finally caught up to what I wish we could have done years ago. Okay. Because like the aspect of like, I remember working on shows years ago and saying, God, this would be so amazing if we had a drone or a high elevated camera in terms of like, we would have to do jib and, in the 90s and early 2000s and stuff. Everything was shot with a jib or a big crane essentially to get a big shot. Yeah. And so, those shots were very limited. And so now I remember even like in the last 5 years ago, I was saying like, they have drone competitions now. And so like, these are fantastic people. And I was like, God, we should get drone people to shoot, put a camera on there and film this stuff. And now in the last year, I am seeing shots that I dreamed about. Actually, I was very excited. I was telling a couple of editors, I'm like, we are so lucky to be working in this time where budgets are getting cut, but we are seeing shots that I dreamed about where this drone comes out of the sky and gives you a real close-up shot of a person.
It
and
elevates
reaction.
The product just by having that Hollywood over the top view.
It's so incredible and exciting, and I think it's what I think like is awesome about technology, right? Because we can linger in these shots that like, and that's a big thing too. I think that's going to evolve how we edit shows now, because for a while it was like, let's add a lot of cuts, a lot of edits, make things faster, much more frenetic. If you ever watch a show like The Amazing Race, that is a very like stylistically edited show that's very frenetic. You probably don't get a shot longer than about 2 seconds because it's a constant go, and that's sort of the beauty of that show. Very talented editors, and it's built that way. They don't linger in a cinematic shot that you would do in a movie with like a 6-second shot,
right?
And I think that's the ever-changing thing that we're...
My cat has been awesome.
I love it. I got to say, it's been nice because I have a dog. And so living with the 8-month-old dog has been quite life-changing, having never had a dog. And so it's always curveballs. And I've had a lot of Zooms. And my dog just sort of decides to pop into a network Zoom and... Hi, this is my dog Bailey. Right? Yeah. He's the other showrunner.
We made like, okay, the kids cannot be anywhere around because we don't want noise, and all of a sudden the cat turns on the TV. You're like, what?
Well, the cat can't live without TV. So.
Yes, that's fair. Stormed out. And
no, but to bring it back, it's a fun time to be an editor, especially if you're working on reality TV shows, because like production value is being raised inherently by technology.
By technology. Yeah. I mean, LED lighting in itself, and be able to shoot more cheaply at night is a thing, right? I mean, and get good quality light without having to bring out a bunch of, heavy power sucking equipment is probably,
And it lasts longer. I mean, it's not as disposable, LED lights last so much longer. I mean, even with photography, like the cheap lights that I can get that are pretty good quality that would have been $500-600, 10 years ago, or like $200, like it's insane. Like how LED has like changed everything.
Dimmable, all that stuff.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem now is probably like shooting maybe too much, it's kind of hard. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're able to, because of GoPros and you can mount cameras everywhere. Yep. And now you can shoot slow-mo in these GoPros and stuff, which is an inherent problem already, because not to get too technical, but like, you can't put time code on GoPros, and so you're having to sync up shots. Because the technical aspect of it is that when you go shoot something, everything gets grouped, right? So it gets put on a canvas. Essentially, it's a timeline, but you have an access to multicam group that essentially has every single angle in one clip, right?
Right.
So,
but it's all timestamped.
And most of it is. But nowadays, certain GoPros can't inherently have time code on itself, so someone has to laboriously sync sync all these GoPro cameras. So you can have 24 cameras and someone literally has to do that.
Well, that brings another question. Camera quality has changed. HD, from when you started, has that been a challenge of dealing with HD image versus, whatever you were getting in 2001?
There is a big, I personally, from an editor perspective, because we're really technically, let's speak from a personal TV watcher, right? Most of us have 4K. I have 4K TV, but I don't get 4K programming, right? So we don't get the top quality of what is available. So I think we're still over in this hub of not seeing the full potential of what can be filmed. So that line is still sort of pushed because inherently there's a problem of storage for most of these. It's easy to say let's shoot in 4K, which is not a problem. The cameras are available, the lenses are, everything's available. But the amount of storage you have for filming a day shoot in 4K versus HD is night and day.
100%. Yeah.
Especially if you're shooting different locations.
And then go to 8K, it's I can only imagine what that will be.
And power needs. I mean, if you're shooting 4K, you're going to chew up a lot more power. That's it can be more expensive exponentially almost.
I like it in the sense that obviously as an editor, inherently if you met an editor, they're pretty cranky. They're pretty much cranky about everything. Oh, why didn't you get this shot? Oh, we should have got this shot. Oh, we should have shot it this way, right? There's a great divide between post and production. I always say, and in the last couple of years, we've been trying to bridge that a little bit because, we're always complainers about stuff. But for me, 4K is I can punch into a shot if it wasn't cropped right.
Yeah,
and the viewer, and it gives you such endless other possibilities to punch in and move shots.
There's so much data there.
There is,
right? And as far as color correction, is it widen the spectrum of what you can do?
So and they do come out. It is a whole night and day situation. So for me, it's let's push technology, but I know it's an easier said than done when I'm not having to worry about how much storage space.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about storage is, I can't remember, I can never remember the law, but it doubles every year, cost versus storage, and it's the same with processing power. Storage is getting cheap. I mean, and as long as we don't go to 24K, you can get a NAS system that has terabytes of storage, even on the consumer side for a couple $100. So I know obviously the professional side would be more expensive because you want them to be reliable. But in the grand scheme of things, if storage prices keep doing what they've been doing over the last 10 years, it might be more attainable unless the quality continues to grow too. And we're at 30K, 40K, whatever, that much data being larger. But it is even in my small amount of working with video, having that 4K is super valuable.
Yeah, I think there's going to come a time where the demand is going to be there, right? Where the viewers are demanding the programming. I remember years ago popping into a Best Buy when HD came out, and you'd go into the special room to watch HD, and you're whoa, this is so cool. Yep. And then you're you buy your, I remember buying
those droplets of water.
It's so great, right?
And that was 480. It was 480.
My wife would hate me because I would always go in Best Buy and I'd be I'll see you in about an hour. I'm going to go in this room and and then you're this is fantastic. What can I watch on this? And they're well, there's 3 shows right now.
Right. And if you watch the other shows, they're going to look weird. You start watching things from the other eras and you're ooh, that doesn't look right because they're used to a CRT screen and very forgiving to a lot of things. Yeah.
I remember when the first season of The Walking Dead launched, and our AMC didn't have an HD feed at home. And I turned it on. I'm gonna get settled in, got my popcorn, got all my happiness, and I start watching. I'm what the hell is this? It's somebody smeared Vaseline all over the lens. I could barely make out what was going on. I'm this is garbage. This is not okay. I've been waiting years for this. Oh, I was so I almost cried. It was so bad.
But on the reverse, if I watch something that I used to watch in the 70s, and I'm yeah, that's the way it should look, and then you watch it in HD. And some of it's shot at a higher quality than it was ever broadcast. And then you're ooh, that's weird.
It almost looks fake.
Yeah, it looks fake. Yeah. I mean, you can really tell, oh, that's a set.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I was my colleague, she's a big Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
I never watched.
Sounds like she's good people already.
Right? Yeah. No, she's fantastic. and so I watched the first episode, I was hooked. But then I was also trying to find the quality of it, right? We're living in this high technology time, but the way that we're now able to watch those old shows, like I was watching The West Wing the other day and I'm like, but I don't remember it being that bad of quality. So is it, why can't we, what? Do I need to get, I almost thought like this morning, I was like, I wonder if I should go buy an old TV just to watch those old shows.
Or
Because
can I program my, to go into like 220p, or whatever, just like pixelate it a little bit.
Have you ever tried to hook up a Nintendo 64 to a flat screen TV? It looks like absolute garbage. Like it's like, I don't even know what game this is. It just looks like blotchy splots all over the place. You have to find some kind of a converter to even
smooth
have
it.
Yeah, it's terrible. Oh, it's so bad.
I got to dust out my old Atari 2600 and see what that does to my HD. You know?
It will not work. I mean, there's. I tell you, there is a video. There's a video online that you can retrofit it so that you can at least get it to RCA.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's just there's just a module inside of it that you solder out and then solder a different. You have to order it online and then solder it in, and then you can hook it up to a normal TV. And for the most part, it looks pretty good. But somebody was just telling me the other day, there's like a kit you can buy now that you just plug everything in. You don't even have to solder it anymore. But I've also got an Atari 2600 sitting on a shelf at home, and I'm afraid, like I was going to convert it, and I'm like, but what if I screw it up? Then I won't have an Atari 2600 anymore. Then what do I do?
Well, and not only that, when we were playing those on like tiny screens too. And so if you put it on everything, the biggest TV in your house was, maybe 26 inches, right? Yeah. And so watching TV or playing games on it was like, you're that far away, and okay, that's fine. But then you put it on a big screen, you're like, oh my God, that is.
Well, I was talking to one of the IT guys at work, and he was saying that Atari is releasing, it's like a Atari 2600 Ti or HD or something. It still runs on cartridges, and it has all the retro games, but it has an HDMI out.
Whoa.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, as a nerd, I want to play my original, but as a realist, that's way easier.
Well, there's a thing that I have used. It's called a MAME arcade emulator.
Yeah.
And so all those are off old CRT screens. So they take the ROM images and dump them. And if you do it on a flat screen LED, it's off-putting sometimes because there's a warmth to the CRTs were, I was like, oh, that's really blocky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I miss Pitfall so much, though. I love that game.
I had a friend that worked at Activision years ago, and I remember I got invited to go tour the dungeon. It was like this. I'm like, do you want to see the dungeon? And I was like, what does that mean? He's like, oh, it's this place where they test the games. And so I remember going to the Activision building in Santa Monica and popping down the elevator. It was like this down floor, and it was like this dark room with couches and monitors. Oh, wow. And those guys must have been in there for days.
I had a friend who did that.
Days. And I was like, these guys get paid? And he's like, oh, yeah, they get paid a lot of money.
They get paid a lot of money, but they got to log a lot of stuff, too.
He doesn't mind logging.
No. I just remember one guy was like, yeah, I have to spend most of my day trying to find out if I can fall off the map and where I can find him. He's like, he's running his guy along the edge of the map the whole time, seeing if there's any holes in it.
I can think of many worse ways to spend days. Most of them I spend 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week doing. Yeah. So,
I got to think it's maddening, too, because what if your job is to obviously test to find the flaws of the games, right? So you spend 3 weeks trying to get to level 35, and you finally get there, and then oop, glitch. I found it.
It's probably even more maddening knowing the way that software is these days. If you're reporting 6 flaws, the game releases and those 6 flaws are still in the game. Oh, we'll fix it in an update in 6 months.
What's so interesting about software and updates, and editing in terms of what is available. I was saying how I had to go to career day not too long ago last year at my kid's school. And so, I was like, I've made some posters, and I was like, okay, well, I know, okay, I'll add some designs of logos of applications that are used like Avid and Premiere, Final Cut X, which is defunct. Mm-hmm. But, and so then I started browsing around to see what the kids are doing these days. And there's things like CapCut for TikTok and things like that. And I showed up to career day and it was quite fascinating to hear all the take from the little kids of oh, well, I use CapCut and how all these applications now is sort of, but nowadays, there's constant necessity for updating these applications, mm-hmm. and they're getting worse. I feel Avid has been the mainstay of film, television because of its stability. There's a lot of applications, of course, CapCut and Premiere and stuff, and they're trying to be much more versatile. Final Cut, I thought, was going to be the rival. In fact, actually, for a while, I thought years ago that Final Cut was going to take over Avid because the Wave, Cold Mountain was edited on Final Cut, and so there was an inherent wave to shift because it seemed much more like user friendly, but also like it created some stability. But then that went away. It's sort of like, but now like all these updates, we as editors complain about the latest Avid and like creating title tools and like all these things. It's like they are trying to make it user friendly, but it's becoming much more glitchy.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, Premiere is notorious for launching broken alphas. Like it'll launch and it will just be broken. Like you'll try to do the most basic things in it or the render will hang because there's one transition in it or something just weird that it's like, how could they not have tested this? And the conspiracy theory is that they want the users to be their beta testers, basically. So they'll launch an alpha version, which is actually a beta version. They'll just wait for all the complaints to roll in, then they'll fix it.
That's maddening.
Yeah, luckily I haven't run into as many problems, but because they've got their whole suite. So Photoshop, a lot of the professional photographers are infuriated, but it's like the industry standard. Yeah, you can get GIMP, and there's some other versions of stuff out there, but they don't have the processing power, and they can't do what Photoshop can do. So all these professional photographers are kind of stuck on Photoshop, but the minute a new version comes out, for the most part, nobody touches it because they're like, if I upgrade to this version, if I update to this version, I won't be able to do my workflow because something's going to be broken. So you wait till like the third version update on it so that you can actually do your job.
That's scary dynamic.
Right.
It's messed up, but they know they have a stranglehold on certainly the photography industry, and then I think you notice it less. I've heard a lot of people who use Premiere complain about it. I haven't seen it as much. And Audition is fairly stable. I haven't really seen a lot of problems in Audition, but for what they charge for that suite of editing programs, it should really come out stable.
Well, that's the fascinating too about cost, right? If you think about it now, like when I started, there's a big rig. It was like a big heavy machine. You couldn't just bring an Avid to your office. It wasn't like a laptop.
Right.
You had the hard drives in itself were like big stacks that had like 2 gigs, and it was like 2 towers. So,
Right. Yeah.
But nowadays, that's the most fascinating part about it, and I think keeps us all fresh, right? We all, as an editor, you sort of have this inherent ability of like, your last edit is your best edit. Right. So you continuously have this underlying belly pressure to keep up, push the envelope of keep doing things because, applications, you can get Avid for like $30 a month in the suite option. Premiere, the same thing. Everything is sort of software based. And so like, again, it's sort of like helping people propel to careers, but also like pushing us all to sort of reinvent things and try different things. And sort of like, there is no like cookie cutter, like music, right? Like, pushing the envelope of trying different things, and these kids, I'm fascinated at where we'll be 20 years from now in terms of like all these kids that are already using like CapCut or like,
you have iMovie on your phone. I mean, you can create that as good, but I mean, you can make a really good rough cut of something that you've shot on your phone.
Well, we haven't even talked about DaVinci Resolve. Blackmagic rolled out DaVinci, years ago. It's free.
Yeah.
And it is powerful. I mean, it's node based, so it's a little bit different than, a timeline based program, but it can do some really cool stuff. If I was starting all this mess from scratch, that's probably where I would go because I wouldn't have to pay $600 a year to have the Adobe suite. I could have Audacity and DaVinci, and be fine,
Well, it's so interesting because at the start of summer in June, my daughter came in and I said, "Can I have an app?" And I said, "Sure. What kind of app do you want?" She's like, "Well, I want to do some editing and some ASMR." And I was like, "Okay."
With my daughter?
Yes. And I was like, "Okay, well, all right. What do you need?" And she's like, "Well, I want to do some audio editing and a little bit of picture editing." And so can I get DaVinci Resolve? And I was taken back a little bit. I was like, wow, I was impressed. And then I was taken back by the fact that she already knows an application. And truth be told, I didn't know DaVinci Resolve.
Yeah.
So this is how like I'm like, oh, I'm feeling old now because like my daughter, who's like 10 going to 11, knows an editing software that's different than what I use.
Right.
And I said, well, maybe you want to use Avid. And she's like, no, I want to. And she was like, a 10-year-old. Like, no. DaVinci Resolve is like the best thing.
It's a workhorse. Like,
so I had to go. I said, give me a hot minute. And I said, give me 2 days. And I watched a bunch of YouTube videos on DaVinci Resolve. And there's some funny ones actually you can watch where like a DaVinci Resolve guy tries Avid and is like goes crazy of how inefficient it is. I can't do anything. Everything is wrong. So but it is. So it's like it's kind of fascinating to see how like all these kids are now using like these different apps.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I had another editor friend who is like he doesn't update often. Like he'll stay with the 5-year-old version because he knows how it goes. And he's like, I don't. They add things and it's not in the right place anymore or something. It's like, and he's like, I'll retrain myself every 5 years, but not every year.
I'm always afraid I'm going to miss something. I've got that FOMO. You know, like what this new text-based editing, or like I want to learn these new things, and then immediately I'm like, why am I learning these new things? What I was doing worked before.
That's where
why
he's
am I
at. He's like,
with it,
I can do what I'm tasked to do with what I have.
It's so true. It's almost a memory too. Like I still have the same muscle memory functions for my keyboard that I've programmed probably in 2005, and they haven't changed. And maybe with a modification or two, it's the same muscle memory, which is why I can do everything super fast, right? But like, it's really fascinating to watch other editors sit in there and you look at how they do things and how they even manipulate. It's the brain. Like I remember sitting in my early years shadowing an editor, and he would take his timeline and slice it all, and nothing would be locked, and then he would shift things over, and I was like, why are you doing that? You're gonna mix your slide everything. It's gonna come out all. He's like, no. I just have that one line that gives me the marker, essentially your guiding point for all your tracks, and so nothing will ever seem sync. And he's like, that's crazy. And I said, you're crazy. And it's interesting how the brain works and everyone functions in different ways, and sort of like you for me, it's so you sort of get stuck on a certain way and you don't want to change things. I remember learning Final Cut, and I was like, oh, okay, fine, I'll do it because that's the wave and stuff. But yeah, you don't want to change things up because you're like, you like what you like.
Yeah. And like you said, you can do things in a efficient manner. However many years, these are the keystrokes. That's
absolutely,
it.
And that's what you go with, right? Like,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's like whatever feels comfortable, and then you're like,
What's really maddening is like I'll watch a video, like a workflow video. Like I feel like I could be more efficient, so I'll watch it and I'm like, wow, that's a really cool workflow. And then I'll try to adapt it, and I'm like, I don't like it. Yeah, I like my beautiful disaster over here instead.
Yeah, I almost have that internal monologue where you're like, like.
Well, I mean, it's almost like having your favorite mouse, and you grab another one that doesn't have that button on the side. You're like, I can't do it.
It's too soon. Okay, too soon. That happened to me yesterday. I was trying to edit some audio, and I kept reaching for a shortcut button that I don't have on my travel mouse, and it was driving me nuts.
It's so different nowadays because we're all remote. Most of the industry is remote, and so like in the old days of like working in the office, someone would be like, "Okay, I need you to work on this quick change right now, but you're going to go into Avid 3 or whatever, Avid Edit 3, and you pop in there, and you're like, you're sitting down, you're like making a move, and like you're dealing with somebody else's settings, and you're like
the hotkeys,
and in those times, and that's nowadays, but now you'd have a showrunner or EP. You would edit on the fly, which I think a lot of editors don't have nowadays, like that peer pressure. I always see newcomers now, and you're like, you guys have it so good. In the old days, you would sit in edit bay in this big suite, and there'd be a big couch, and people have salads and lunches and stuff, and you're like one chair, one desk, and a big monitor having to make these changes on the fly while having a small conversation, right? And so you'd pop in, you have this executive producer who'd be like, yeah, we just need to make this quick track swap. And I'm like, yeah, no problem popping in. And then you're like, I don't have my settings.
Yeah.
And you're like trying to do basic functions, and it's like you don't know how to edit, and you're looking like super like, and the showrunner's like, can we do this? Can we do this already? I'm like, sorry, do not have my settings. And so I'm like, I remember having like an AE, and it wasn't like technology wise, because something could be simply just like brought in really, really fast. And so like you're there trying to do your keyboard settings, and you're like, I just can't function like this. And so,
and I don't edit every day. So like I have my settings, but I have to relearn them every time because I was like, I'm getting old. Like every time something new comes in, it pushes something old out. So it could have been last week, and I would have had all my shortcuts and been flying through a project. And then a week goes by, and I sit down, and I'm like, I need stickers. I need stickers for my keys. I need stickers because I don't remember.
It's so funny because my keyboard died like last year, and so I had to just take whatever Apple keyboard was around the house. And my son came in and he said, "Where's your keyboard?" And I said, "Oh, this is my keyboard." And he's like, "Where are the colors?" You know, and it's like, "Oh, I don't need it." He's like, "You don't need it?" I'm like, "Nope, I'll just like you know." But like he was like, "Oh, the yellow does this, and the red does this, and the blue does the lift, and all these things and stuff." But yeah, it's all muscle memory nowadays and stuff. But yeah, I don't miss those days of having people in my, you know, like I remember.
Over your back.
Yeah, I remember first day, right? You show up, and most of the editors would start a couple every Monday, and they would all the coordinator would be like, "Okay, you can pick an edit bay, which one you want," and I would always pick the smallest edit bay without a couch by design.
Nice.
And they're like, "This is so cramped. There's a nice one that's like big and open. It's got a window and a big couch and big." They was like, no. And he's like, "Why?" He's like, "Because that's where the producers want to hang out, and I do not want people hanging out in my office." and so I'd make it almost the most uncomfortable thing. Like, and sure enough, like the editor would be like, "Pick the nicest big suite." That's where the showrunner hang out all day. And it's the most awkward thing to like edit with a person in the background, because they're like, you know, they would sit there and be like, "Oh, that's not quite right." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm editing here, so like this is trial and error situation and stuff." So like, yeah, those days of like, it's the nice part about it now, being able to like work from home.
When you were telling me about, because of people are working from home, that people in different time zones, having different editors in different time zones, especially with reality, is somewhat beneficial because of the amount of footage you guys pour through and when you get it, right?
Yeah, so that's the best part. Like, obviously, like, I mean, I like it not having to drive 3 hours to, you know, back and forth, an hour and a half each way to work and stuff. But now, really, like, you can move anywhere and be really flexible to producers, which is fantastic. Like, we have an editor who is working in Norway, and so, you know, we're in Los Angeles, and so like, as we get notes in the morning, producers can quantify those notes, make thoughts, adjustments, figure out what they're going to do, problem solve. And when the other editor wakes up at like 10 p.m. and it's good to start your day, you have a game plan, and then, you know, you talk through the changes, and then you go to bed, and you wake up in the next morning, and like a dream, it's already done.
It's there, right?
It's sort of godsend for a producer to have somebody working like completely different opposite. And I kind of,
and they're not burning the midnight oil; they're just doing it in their
She just messaged us that she's leaving Norway and coming back, and I was like so sad about it. sad emoji, because really, like, it was like I feel like a saving grace to have somebody on those hours, because you could, most of the time you're sort of problem solving during the day, and so you have editors waiting around for you to make decisions on things. And, you know, of course, from an editor perspective, I enjoyed those days. Oh yeah, take time, like figure out what you're going to do with my notes, like, you know, and then half the day, and then you're scrambling to try and get everything done in this short amount of time. But now, those schedules. I have an editor friend who works for a production company based in New York, and so like, you know, their East Coast editors wrap at 6:30, and if you know an East Coast editor, we talked about this, that like they're rough around the edges. You ask them to stay past 6:30, they're like, "No." You know, are you serious? I'm out of here. And so like they realized that sort of like, you know, vibe of the East Coast, and so like they hire editors on the West Coast to fill those sort of extra hours, so that 6:30 they hand their timeline, and they finish their work until like what we would be like 10 o'clock, and then they can accomplish everything they want. And so that time zone is such a variable, nice actual element to be able to get these things done in a short amount of time.
Right, because you got quick turnarounds, right?
Yeah, everything's pretty quick nowadays. You know, I think like we are certainly, as we're, you know, working up new editors, you know, getting them used to the sort of like fast turnaround, because it's just how quickly can you problem solve this? And, you know, most network notes are addressed within like 2 days. And I don't know what the film schedules are like, but I know that we have about 2 days to address notes.
Right.
It's a very, very quick turnaround.
And so you guys start off with how many cameras usually?
You know, it varies. You know, obviously as on challenge sets, there could be over 25 cameras. And if you really think about GoPros, there's like 30 cameras.
So you've got 30 cameras all shooting 8 hours of footage.
Essentially, you know, you know, it's hard. Like production puts these GoPros on these rigs sometimes too. So like there's a lot of time. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but sometimes they get great moments. And a lot of times they get the moments that the real camera guys can't catch because something happens in a moment, and that happens to be like your insurance base of having a camera. I don't know what Survivor, they shoot a lot of camera as well, like a lot of cameras. And so it is a lot of footage being filmed across the board.
Right. And so the loggers and the assistant editors have a lot of stuff to weed through.
And so we talked earlier about logging in the early days. So now that the modern day use of loggers is gone now, and sort of pilotware and logging that footage is sort of gone and sort of streamlined. And maybe it was sort of an introduction to the fact that there's better ways and sort of the evolution of how you can make things and produce shows a little bit faster without necessarily having to watch everything. I mean, everything gets watched, but now you're relying on producers' field notes and things like that to highlight things, and then you watch moments. And then if you really find a moment that is compelling television or a compelling storyline, then you really deep dive into that sort of hour or two to see what
what coverage you had for that.
Yeah, and a lot of it obviously is like, Greek chorus is a big thing for reality TV, like the commentary on the commentary. So like you're trying to find those things, and producers are fantastic at being able to log all this stuff and write this stuff down so that at least you have a good solid base of like information as it's come down. So really, even as production happens, you sort of know what storylines are sort of taking place.
Got it.
By what's being filmed, because they're sort of being able to jot down everything that's happening. Oh, so and so, and we should be able to track this, and resident professionals now are so good at it. They're able to sort of like quantify that. It's, the education process for the creation of television is sort of like a mainstay. So like it's very efficient now. You don't need to go back to like having to watch somebody or having to pay me like $500 a week to watch everything.
Only imagine how much that would cost with 20 cameras to pay somebody to go through and physically watch each one for 8 hours worth of footage.
It's just not needed anymore, really. And really challenges, you sort of like that sort of like competition-based. Most shows like that will have, all the incidents will have in a certain moment, and obviously like they're covered by the same time code.
So beginning and end.
You can find a different angle for certain things and stuff. But most scenes, end up having one camera, two cameras. Most have one, and as an editor, like being very fortunate to have camera shooters and DPs that know the business and know how to shoot a scene and to establish like a wide and a medium shot and close-up shots, and that's why it's really hard, I would imagine, for a new camera op to go in and start filming stuff, because it is a very and I've never worked production, so I don't know what that is. I've always complained early on. I'm like, oh, why did they get this shot? And then you really realize, just if you think about it, everything has happened in real time. You don't know what this scene. We could be recording a podcast and we don't know what the actual storyline is going to be. And so like for a camera guy to come in and say like, oh, you should have gotten the shot of Tony like looking, upset. He didn't know. He didn't know what the storyline was.
Right.
And so we have we watch it later and be like, how clearly you didn't see it. Well, we've been watching like an hour of footage beforehand. Right. So we have that moment, that epiphany moment of what the storyline is going to be. But so they're fantastic at being able to cover it. And they've gotten better at it actually in the last couple of years in terms of being able to get coverage, because it's important. Like the cutaway is important. You don't have reshoots. There's no reshoots.
Right, exactly.
Despite the fact that, there is an inherent thought that reality TV is produced, it's not. Especially competition-based shows, you get what you get. And if you don't get boring cast members or people that just don't know how to say a good soundbite or do entertaining things,
there's not much you can do.
There's nothing you can do. You can animate it, and you can create moments. The editor can obviously has great liberty to be able to accentuate certain things and make things exciting, cut them faster. And
but you can't manufacture charisma.
No,
exactly.
Just add music.
When in doubt, add sound effects and a couple of bells and whistles graphics, and there you go. So
just some suspenseful music in the background. We'll feel something, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like it's crazy. I've worked in a lot of different lines of work, and the one thing that every area has always suffered from was communication. People are terrible at communicating their ideas and their intentions and stuff. But it sounds like, that's what makes it run well oiled. Like there has to be a communicative through line. If the producers are making notes and saying this is what we want, if the communication fails, then what? Like what's the fail safe?
Well, thankfully for us, who gets hired has a big to do in terms of like knowing the show, knowing what have you done in terms of like experience, right? That's the be all end all for us, is that, I think we talked earlier about bridging the gap between post and production. And there's across all shows, I think there has been an inherent divide, because like, the added notion of like, we'll fix it in post, and that comes from the fact that production it's an entity and post is an entity, and they don't generally talk to each other, other than your showrunner who bridges the gap, or certain producers that sort of like bridge both sides of it, right? But it's one thing and the other thing. And so, in the last couple of years, we've been really having those conversations of the pre-production, right, aspect of like, this is what we expect. This is what was a problem last year or the last series. And this is what we need to sort of make changes on that will help us help you. And having those conversations, like, honestly, because you mentioned, Tony, that there were so many different cameras and so many shots, right? So many times, sometimes some shots may get left out. The DP really had a vision for a certain motion, but because production wraps and it's all in post and that communication doesn't happen, a lot of times those shots never get used, and maybe they get buried in something. So that's sort of, we've been really trying the last couple of seasons to sort of bridge that gap. Pre-conversations, during conversations to shoot, post-conversations, sort of like, so that everything that gets hammered out in terms of like, we really need this, or we didn't get enough of this footage, or we really need night footage, or time, these sort of elements that they would, because they're so knee deep. And I production people live a nomad existence where like, it's like 12, 14, 16 hour days.
Right.
And it's craziness out there trying to capture everything. If there's a moment that happens in the other house or another room, and you have all these things, and so they're flying by the seat of their pants trying to get everything, and you're worried about a shot from over here that no one got. And so, like, I think bridging that gap in this expectations and the experience of having done it more than one season or two seasons, they're so instinctual about a lot of things. And I have an editor on my show right now that he worked in the field, and so he has that sensibility about like understanding what they're going through, and sort of like we've had conversations about that. Oh, well, that makes sense now. And so, but bridging that gap is a big thing. Where like, I think we are washing away that divide, because it's not that way. It's like, we are as editors in post putting out what they did. And so it would be, like, we want to put the best thing of what they shot.
Mutually beneficial to
And so, but there is an inherent, like, I think at the beginning we've had pre-production meetings where like, they're very sensitive, when we ask for things, and, because we sit in an office and very cushy, and we have no hindsight or what they do. And so we make asks, and they're like, but you do realize how hard that is,
Well, no, I wouldn't ask. Yeah. Sounds simple enough to me. Shoot. If you could leave everybody with one encapsulated thought of what the most important part of what you do is, what would you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's storytelling.
Awesome.
What encompasses what we do. People ask me that. Well, what do you do? Well, yes, I put images together and I score them and I make moments, and they can be funny and they can be dramatic and they can be exciting or sad. But above all, it's like, what's the story we're telling? That's the biggest thing about an editor is that you take whatever material and you make it compelling. And if it's somebody's story, that's it. Without a good story, it's not compelling. It's not entertaining.
Right.
And not engaging. You need to have a story, something that you're trying to tell. And that's all. We're storytellers at the end of the day.
That sounds perfect. Like, that's awesome. And it's true. I can't express enough how thankful we are that you came in to talk to us, Ernesto. It's been very informative, eye-opening, and a lot of fun.
It's so fun. Yeah. I love it. I would speak hours and hours upon hours on it from different, because it really is all encompassing. I always have conversations about the fact that, maybe I talk to somebody who will become an editor, right. Like I will someday retire, and that inherent energy or excitement about it will be the next storyteller who can make me cry, right? Or tell me a story when I'm an old man sitting in a retirement home and watching this, and it's a compelling story, and I'm like in tears. I'm like, what a great editor.
Well, and I've never heard an interview with an editor. I've never heard anyone talk to an editor and be like, hey, what do you do? Can you explain it to us? And frankly, most of the people that listen to this aren't going to be industry people. They're fortunate enough to hear your step-by-step of what it is, so that this is probably their first exposure. They've heard the term and they have a loose idea, but now you've given them the information to like, this is what it really is. So that was my hope with this, that people would finally be able to hear and appreciate what you do. And
peel back the curtain on what people do and what they actually do in said job. Yeah.
And I will say that, above all, if anybody is actually ever thinking of becoming an editor, and so you have to be really thick-skinned, right? Mm-hmm. We're critics. We have to take criticism. The constant evolving of an editor is to re-edit and make many changes upon changes with a smile. And that's the hard part for a lot of people because they can't take criticism or feedback. And, you're being tasked to re-edit something. And so like, there's an inherent personality trait that you have to sort of have to be that editor.
Yeah.
That resonates because that's what, you could be the most fantastic editor and have the most important vision of doing things and editing things. But if you don't have the ability to work with people and collaborate and have that sensibility to take someone's vision, even though you feel like it's wrong, and make it happen, then you're not going to survive in this business because it is a very personal business and you have to be in a room for somebody or communicate somebody's. And so that to me is like the be all end all. You have to have the right vibe.
That's a great outlook too. I mean, not take it personally and to do the best job you can do. That's a great outlook, man. I really appreciate that. And most of all, I just thank you, man, for what you do, and thank you for sharing it with us.
So fun. Thanks, guys.